Hi everyone from the outside looking in. Anyone would say that I was living the dream. I live in a sleek penthouse apartment in the center of the city with floor-to-ceiling windows that provide a view. Most people can only dream about the kind of place that feels like the universe telling you that you've made it, and maybe I have. My name is Lily, and I'm 38 years old, a successful marketing executive married to Andrew, a finance powerhouse who is as attractive as he is ambitious. We have everything. Realize that luxury is just a shiny cage. Andrew and I met in our early 20s, when our ambition was equaled only by our love for one another. He was the type of man who could walk into any room and take control of it with his presence commanding without effort. I fell for his drive, confidence, and the way he always seemed to have a plan. At the time, I thought his success was our success, a power couple destined to conquer the world together. However, something changed along the way. Perhaps it was We still made time for the occasional dinner at five-star restaurants and attended parties with our influential circle of friends, but it all felt staged, as if we were acting out parts in a script we no longer believed in. Perhaps it was the endless business trips that kept him away for weeks at a time, or perhaps it was the quiet moments where we were supposed to connect that turned into quiet instead. The spark we once shared gradually cooled out and was replaced by a cold, efficient routine. I've grown accustomed to the loneliness that creeps in, even when he's sitting a few feet away. We don't argue, but it's worse than that. We live side by side like strangers sharing the same space. I never imagined I'd be the kind of woman who would feel this way. I find myself curled up on our immaculate cream-colored couch with a glass of Chardonnay while Andrew works late into the night. He hardly looks up from his laptop, his fingers tapping away at keys and his phone buzzing with urgent messages. I've climbed the corporate ladder and broken through every glass ceiling in my career, and I love clients who respect me and a team that looks up to me. However, at home, I feel small and invisible, as if I've lost the part of myself that once dreamed of more than just success. I miss the version of myself that was wild and spontaneous and unafraid of making mistakes. These days, I'm a picture-perfect executive and wife, polished and poised, but I can't recall the last time I felt truly alive. It was on one of those rainy nights when the city felt. I decided to leave our glass cage because I was so sad. Andrew hardly noticed me as I put on my coat and mumbled something about going out for drinks with a friend. He nodded absently, already absorbed in the glow of his screen. I went outside and let the raindrops soak through my hair as if it could wash away the numbness I'd been carrying. I didn't have a destination in mind. Instead, I let the city pull me along, the sound of the raindrops against the pavement guiding my steps. I walked for blocks, feeling the steady pulse of a city's nightlife, until I found myself standing in front of a small underground jazz club that I hadn't been to in years. Tucked away in an alley, the neon sign was faded and buzzing softly, but it was clear that this was the place I used to go in my 20s, before job titles and responsibilities, when I still believed in magic and possibility. The room was dimly lit, with a small stage where a band was playing a slow, soulful tune, and I could feel the music seeping. I slipped onto a stool at the bar and allowed myself to lose myself in the nostalgia of it all. It was like traveling back in time to a past version of myself that I had nearly forgotten. That's when I first saw him, a black man leaning against the bar with his back to me, but there was something familiar about the way he moved. When he turned and our eyes met, I was shocked, and then I felt a wave of something deeper that I hadn't felt before. It was Jack. Jack had changed in appearance over the years, with a few gray hairs at his temples and a hint of fatigue in his eyes, but he still had that easy smile that made you feel like the only person in the room. As he stepped closer, his voice became richer and deeper than I had remembered, and I realized how much I had missed it. I managed to feel my heart skip a beat. "I can't believe it's you," and he pulled me into an embrace, which allowed me to sink into it and feel the firm warmth of his chest. Standing there with him, I felt like that girl again, the one who used to think she could be anything. We sat at the bar ordering drinks and fell into a casual rhythm of conversation. It seemed like no time had passed at all. He told me about the club. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had dark skin that seemed to glow in the dim light of the club. He was black, and back in college, he was the guy everyone noticed, the one who could light up a room with just a smile. "Do you remember the nights we used to spend here?" Jack asked in a low, almost wistful voice. "You were wild back then, Lily." "You had this spark," I laughed, but it felt hollow. "That was a long time ago, Jack." He acknowledged that it wasn't easy, but it was his passion. He talked about the late nights and the struggles to keep the doors open, but there was a fire in his eyes that I hadn't seen in anyone in a long time, especially not in Andrew, lingering on me in a way that made my heart race. But I believe the real you is still there somewhere. I swallowed hard and looked away, feeling the walls I had put up around myself beginning to crumble and the facade of the ideal executive and wife slipping a little. I was afraid of how easily he could see through it. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, losing ourselves in the rhythm of the conversation. When nightfall finally arrived, I felt lighter and more free, as if I were returning to a world I had long since lost. I drove home that night with the windows down, letting the cool air fill the car and the city lights blurred in the rain, but I couldn't stop smiling for the first time in years. Jack walked me to the door. It was still raining softly and steadily, and I stood there feeling it wash over me. "You should come back sometime," Jack said, his voice nearly drowned out by the sound of the rain. "It's good to see you like this, Lily." I nodded, unable to find the right words. It's funny how easily a new routine can slip into your life, especially when it feels like a void you didn't even realize was there. I realized how far away from that girl I had drifted as I slipped into bed next to Andrew, who was already sound asleep. I told myself it was harmless, just an old friend, just a night out, but I couldn't ignore the pull I felt. Jack's smile lingered in my mind, and I knew deep down that I would be back. I didn't tell Andrew where I was going most nights, and he didn't ask because he was busier than ever, buried under a mountain of spreadsheets and conference calls, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my growing restlessness. Even though I occasionally received texts from Jack about a band he thought I'd like, I kept returning to the jazz club because of something I couldn't quite put into words. Perhaps it was the music, the unadulterated, soulful performances that seemed to peel back layers of my meticulously planned life. I didn't have to pretend that I could drop the mask of the polished executive or the ideal wife. I could just be Lily, and we began spending more time together. It was easy and comfortable, like slipping back into an old friendship. Jack's smile lit up when he saw me walk through the door, as if he had been waiting for me. It felt like coming home when I stepped into that dimly lit room filled with soft laughter and the low hum of conversation with Jack. We were tucked away in a booth in the corner away from the last few people at the bar, and you had this spark, Lily. You were the girl everyone noticed, and I laughed, shaking my head. "That was a long time ago, Jack. I'm not that girl anymore." His smile softened a small, sad thing. Maybe not, but I hadn't thought about those days in years. College, our wild youth, and the nights that blurred together in a haze of parties and possibilities. He asked, his eyes searching mine. "Does it make you happy?" It wasn't an accusatory question, just a quiet curiosity that made me wriggle a little in my seat. I never knew how to respond to him. It wasn't a simple yes or no. It was complicated layers of comfort routine, a certain kind of satisfaction. "I still see her, and I always wondered what happened to you after college." I took a sip of my drink, the whiskey burning a slow path down my throat. "I guess I got caught up in life and the job, the marriage, the whole picture, the perfect package." I shrugged, forcing a smile, but it wasn't the kind of joy that lit me up from the inside. "I'm happy, I suppose." Jack leaned back, studying me as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. "I always thought you'd do something crazy or unexpected, and maybe I did once, but I forgot how we left it there." The silence between us was heavy with everything we weren't saying, and I knew he could see through me in a way that no one else could. He told me how difficult it had been to watch his marriage fall apart and how he'd thrown himself into the club to keep from drowning in the sadness. I told him how lonely I felt even with Andrew right next to me. It was exciting and frightening all at once, like standing at the edge of a cliff and wondering what it would feel like to jump over. Over the next few weeks, our conversations deepened as we discussed everything from his divorce to my strained marriage to our shared disillusionment with the lives we'd chosen. Jack led me to my car one night after a particularly soulful performance by a saxophonist who played as if he were bearing his soul to the room. The rain was pouring down in sheets, soaking us both, but neither of us moved to leave. Instead, we stood in the alley, the street lights casting a golden glow on the wet pavement, the sound of the rain drowning out the rest of the world. It felt like he was peeling back layers I'd forgotten were there, unearthing parts of myself I'd buried long ago. He reached up and gently tucked a wet strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my cheek, as if he were searching for the girl he used to know. The simple touch sent a shiver down my spine, and for a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Jack," I whispered, my voice shaking, not sure what I wanted to say. Perhaps I wanted to tell him to stop and walk away before we crossed a line we couldn't uncross, but the words wouldn't come. He just looked at me, his gaze full of an unconscious longing. Something changed, and the kiss deepened, filled with a desperate kind of need that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. His hand slid into my hair, drawing me closer, and I melted into him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest, the rain soaking through our clothes, the taste of it intoxicating. It felt like he could see right through me, past the walls I'd built, straight to the parts of me that ached for something real, and before I could stop myself, I leaned in. I searched his face to try to make sense of what had just happened, Lily. He murmured, his voice rough and almost painful. "We shouldn't." I know I cut him off, but even as I said it, I knew I didn't mean it, knew I wouldn't take it back, even if I could. His lips, the feel of his fingers tracing the curve of my jaw, and when we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, our foreheads resting against each other. The rain was still pouring cold and relentless, but I could hardly feel it other than Jack's breath against my skin and the taste of his kiss. I knew I had crossed a line, shattered the fragile boundary between friendship and something more, and as I got into my car, my hands shaking, I realized I wasn't sure if I was driving away from him or if I was driving. I opened a door that had been locked for years, allowing the floodwaters to rush in, and despite the guilt that was already eating at me, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. I didn't go straight home that night. Instead, I drove through the city in a daze, the streets hazy from the rain and my own tears. I tried to convince myself that it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, but I knew deep down that this wasn't just a kiss. It was a spark, a match struck against dry kindling, and the fire it started was one I wasn't sure I wanted to put out. When I finally returned to the apartment, I prepared myself for the emptiness that would greet me. Andrew was asleep as usual. I slipped into bed still soaked from the rain and stared up at the ceiling, the taste of Jack's kiss still on my lips. I knew I should feel guilty, and part of me did, but another part of me, the part that had been buried under years of routine and obligation, felt something else. His phone was plugged in on the nightstand, the soft glow of the screen illuminating his serene face. He looked so calm, so sure of himself, and for a moment I felt a rush of anger at him and at myself at the life we had built that now felt so hollow. When I drove home with trembling hands and the rain still beating against the windshield, something inside of me had snapped. Perhaps it was a lock I didn't even know existed, or perhaps it was a thread that had been pulled too tight for too long, but no matter what, there was no turning back. The next time I saw Jack, it was like a dam breaking. We didn't discuss the kiss or acknowledge what it meant or the line we'd crossed instead. It began with a few stolen moments, a lingering touch when he handed me a drink, and the brush of his fingers against mine beneath the table. It wasn't enough, but it was all we could risk. At first, we met whenever I could get away from Andrew. My excuses got easier and more fluid, and Andrew didn't question me because he was always preoccupied with his own never-ending to-do list and clients who needed attention or friends who wanted to catch up. Jack and I created our own little world, a hidden bubble where nothing else mattered. We spent hours tucked away in the club's back room, surrounded by old vinyl records and the faint scent of whiskey. Sometimes we talked, sharing secrets and stories we never told anyone else, and other times we just sat together in silence, his hand warm against mine. I wondered if he noticed the change in me, how I seemed lighter and more animated, or perhaps he just chalked it up to a good mood, thankful that I wasn't bugging him about his long hours. There were nights when I would lie awake in bed with my phone glowing with a text from Jack. It was just a simple "miss you" or "can't stop thinking about you," but it made my heart race like I was a teenager again, sneaking around behind my parents' backs. I would text him back, my fingers shaking as I typed, knowing that Andrew was sleeping right next to me, unaware of the guilt gnawed at me a dull look. Quiet intimacy more powerful than words in those moments. I would stand in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, and wonder who I had become. I told myself that I deserved this escape, this chance to feel alive again, after years of being an accessory in my own marriage, but deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. I wasn't just cheating on Andrew. I was also betraying a part of myself. Nevertheless, I couldn't stop the magnetic connection between Jack and me. It was as if he had unlocked something inside me that I couldn't close again even if I wanted to. We met in a coffee shop in a hidden area of the city, a dimly lit bar, and a park bench at night. Together, we built a network of hidden spots where we were able to escape the reality of our separate lives. It was a Friday night when everything almost fell apart. The club was packed that night. The music was louder, and the crowd was buzzing with the electric hum of a great performance. I had sneaked out of a dinner with Andrew's business clients, claiming to have a work emergency, and my heart was already racing at the thought. I had the idea of seeing Jack when I got there, and he was waiting for me in the back room. His smile brightened as soon as he saw me, and we sank into a familiar rhythm while speaking in low tones and holding hands on the table between us. I leaned in close and breathed in the scent of his cologne, which was mingled with the smoky atmosphere of the club. He was telling me about a new band he wanted to book, and his voice was calm and low. When I felt this flutter in my chest, a sort of joy I hadn't felt in years, I squeezed his hand and grinned in a way that felt. He said, genuine, unforced, "I don't think I've ever seen you this happy." His thumb traced tiny circles on the back of my hand, and I acknowledged that my voice was hardly more than a whisper. The moment felt precarious, as if we were standing on the precipice of something enormous and dangerous. Jack opened his mouth to speak, but we both heard it, a familiar voice cutting through the club's cacophony. I jerked my hand away from Jack's, my heart slamming against my ribs. My pulse roared in my ears. He appeared out of place in the back room's doorway. His suit was immaculate, and his hair was styled like he had just left a boardroom. For a moment, I thought he knew that he had caught us off guard, but then he smiled and stepped forward without telling us. "I didn't know you'd be here tonight," Andrew said warmly, reaching out a hand, which Jack took, his face wearing a perfect mask of calm. "Good to see you," Andrew said, smiling. "I was just catching up with Lily. It's been a busy night." Looking at me, "I can see that I appreciate you keeping her company. I know I've been a little absent lately," and he didn't know that relief came in such a strong wave that I felt lightheaded. I forced a smile, hoping it would seem natural, just catching up with an old friend. I managed to make my voice sound high and strained, even to my own ears, and Drew's eyes softened. He leaned down to kiss my cheek in a casual, affectionate gesture, but it felt like a knife twisting in my stomach. "I was hoping to surprise you," but he spoke in a low voice, as if he were sharing a secret. He was smooth and confident as always, but I could see the tension in his eyes and the slight strain in his smile. He knew how close we had come and how fragile this whole thing was. "Take care of her for me," Jack Andrews said as he turned to leave, clapping Jack on the shoulder. "I'm glad she has someone like you." "I thought we could grab a late dinner after your night out," I said, keeping my hand on the edge of the table to keep it from shaking. I felt as though the room was tilting beneath me as I watched Andrew leave, completely unaware of the storm raging just beneath the surface. When he left, I turned to Jack, my hands still shaking, and he reached out, gently squeezing my fingers that were close. He murmured, his voice low and steady, "Too close," and I whispered back, the panic rising in my throat. I wanted to run to get out of this mess I had made, but I couldn't move Jack, so what are we going to do? I don't know what he said, but I don't want to stop either. That was the problem. We sat there for a moment longer, the silence thick with everything we couldn't say. The club buzzed with life around us, the music and laughter, but it felt distant and muffled. It was like we were in a bubble floating in our own little world, but I could feel it starting to crack when I did this. I tried to convince myself that I was still the woman he thought I was when I finally left with Andrew, but deep down I knew I had crossed a line that I couldn't uncross, broken something that couldn't be put back together, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to. In the days after that near miss with Andrew, I felt like I was walking on the thinnest layer of ice. Every conversation and glance between us felt loaded, as if we were both aware of. The crack lines beneath the surface were invisible to Andrew, who was still preoccupied with his own world of mergers and client dinners, but my heart had turned into a battlefield torn between two impossible decisions. The guilt that had been eating away at me for weeks felt like a beast tearing its way at my throat, and I was unable to escape it. Not even during our brief moments of happiness together, when we were laughing at a joke or cuddling up to each other, there was a shadow over us, a whisper of inevitable that I couldn't ignore. Our time together was beginning to feel stolen, tainted by the fear that everything could fall apart at any moment. I could see it in Jack's eyes as well, the way his fingers lingered a little longer when he touched me, as if he was trying to memorize every detail. I couldn't stop going back to the club, looking for Jack's presence, like a Dr. *G. It had become our sanctuary, a place where the rest of the world couldn't touch us. The next time we met, it was a rainy Wednesday afternoon as the clouds hung heavy in the sky, casting everything in a muted gray light. The club was quiet and closed to the public, but Jack had invited me to meet him there before the staff arrived, and I knew without him saying it that this meeting was different, suffocating us both. But the thought of ending it and returning to the cold, empty life I'd been living before Jack felt unbearable. I took a deep breath and sat down next to him for a moment, and we just sat there in silence, the only sound being the steady drip of rain against the windows. He reached for my hand, his fingers warm and comforting, but I couldn't look at him because I knew I would break Lily. He looked up when I entered, his expression soft but somber, as if he was already preparing for the goodbye neither of us wanted to say. He started softly, his voice a low rumble that seemed to wrap around my heart. "I don't know what to do, Jack. I don't want to lose you, but I also don't want to ruin my life." He nodded, his gaze searching my face intensely, as if he could read my mind. "I need to talk, I know," I whispered, squeezing his hand, and my throat felt tight like I was trying to swallow glass fragments. I looked up at him, then really looked at him, and saw the pain etched into his features, the same anguish that had been keeping me awake at night. "I can't go back to the way things were." Before I could say, "I can't just forget you forget this," Jack's eyes softened and he cupped my face in his hands, wiping away a tear with his thumb. "You don't have to forget," he whispered. "I'll never forget you, Lily, but I can't keep doing this watching you leave knowing you're going back to a life that makes you miserable." The truth of what he said hit me like a punch to the gut, but he wasn't saying it to hurt me. Rather, he was using it to protect me, even if it meant letting me. He pressed his forehead to mine, his breath warm against my lips. "I don't have the answers, Lily, but I know one thing. I want you to be happy, and if that means letting you go, then I will, even if it breaks my heart." I couldn't stop the tears from streaming down my cheeks, now hot and bitter. I kissed him, then a slow, painful kiss that was filled with all the words When we finally parted ways, we were both out of breath, our foreheads still pressed together, and I could feel his heart beating quickly against my chest, echoing the frantic rhythm of my own. I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper, a last-ditch hope that he might have a way to keep us together without destroying everything. His lips were firm but soft, as if he was trying to imprint the memory of us together to last long. Jack closed his eyes. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe this is the end of the line for us, or maybe it's just the beginning of something else I can't say," but for a moment, it felt like he was trying to find the strength to say what needed to be said. When he opened them again, there was a sadness there that broke something deep inside me. I felt a sob rise in my throat, and he pulled me into his arms, holding me close as I sobbed into his shoulder. The rain kept coming down outside, a constant, unrelenting downpour that seemed to echo the storm inside me. We sat like that for. "I loved you, Jack." I whispered the words aloud for the first time, and I knew it was too late, but I needed him to hear it and know it. He kissed the top of my head. We had been wrapped up in each other for a long time, neither of us wanting to let go. I knew that when I walked out that door, everything would change, that the spell we had created around ourselves would break, and we'd have to face the harsh light of reality. But for now, I allowed myself to stay in his arms, acting as though this moment could last forever. There were no promises or plans for the future, just the unadulterated truth of how we felt for one another and the knowledge that it might not be enough. I stood up and took one last look at him, remembering the lines of worry on his brow, the tenderness in his eyes, and the slight tremble of his hands as he let me go. "Jack, I love you too, Lily," he whispered, "more than you'll ever know." We pulled back our eyes and met in a shared understanding. I turned and left the club, the rain hitting my face like icy needles mingling with the tears I couldn't hold back. I didn't look back because I knew that if I did, I wouldn't be able to leave. I stepped into the gray, rain-soaked city, feeling the cold seeping into my bones. I had no idea what was going to happen next, whether I could return to my life with Andrew, or even if I wanted to. "Goodbye, Lily." He nodded to the word, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. For the first time in years, I felt absolutely alone on the brink of something huge and terrible, but there was also a glimmer of something else, something that vaguely resembled hope.